Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the third episode of the Undefined podcast. I'm so glad that you could make it here. Just before we get started with the episode, I wanted to tell you guys that I made a Discord server finally, and I'm really excited about it. I highly recommend joining the server if you're interested. I'll leave a link down below in the description, of course. So the Undefined server is a place for thoughtful and constructive discourse regarding consumer design, UI, UX, computer science, and related topics. This is a place for you if you want to discuss ideas, engage in constructive conversation, and of course, have a lot of fun. If you're familiar with my channel, then you know that I made a Frutiger Aero video honestly a while back now. It's hard to believe that I put that out in December 2021. It's been literally 4 years, and Frutiger Aero has changed so much since then. The community has exploded. There actually is a community, but you've also noticed that since then, I haven't really made or talked about Frutiger Aero too much in any of my videos. I do have one follow-up video from like the next year, but that's about it. And honestly, I wasn't really sure like how to talk about it. It was actually a little bit overwhelming because it's so different now, and people invented new subcategories and classified things, and I was like kind of becoming out of date with it. I've been kind of stalking and sort of involved in the subreddit and the community, and my new Discord server is really heavily about Frutiger Aero. Also, I mean, people have made all sorts of subcategories like Dorfic or Frutiger Metro or Dark Aero, Funky Seasons and Tertiary Color Palettes, Techno Zen, Vector Flourish, Super Flat Pop, Herbling. I mean, these are all sort of factions of Frutiger Aero that are sort of all their own things now. And I could have a whole other video. In fact, I probably will have a whole other video just kind of dissecting Frutiger Aero maybe more in depth and going through these specific categories. Let me know if you're interested in that or not. But my point is, Frutiger Aero, the concept of it, the nostalgia for it, the community around it, the awareness of it has just multiplied infinitely since the video came out. I'm really glad that I could have a sub-part of that in some way. That was sort of a tangential intro. Now, besides just in the Reddit sphere and in the online sphere and the indie circles, I think Frutiger Aero has sort of made headlines all over the world. And not saying that it's like a popular aesthetic again, but I do think it's sort of become mainstream enough that it kind of has a name for itself. And if you would ask a UI designer, someone who works in the corporate world, if they knew about it, I think the chances would be maybe not high, but at least relatively high. And I've noticed a lot of companies sort of seeing this trend and seeing this grassroots nostalgia for this aesthetic. And I think there's a little bit of a sentiment to bring Frutiger Aero back. I mean, I know a lot of the indie, underground, just online Reddit people would be happy if it came back. And I think that maybe some of the corporations have been noticing that and possibly feeding on that. And I've noticed that a lot of new UI designs currently sort of favor that more dimensional, depthful, texturized look that Frutiger Aero had. So scrolling through Reddit, learning new things about Frutiger Aero, and even noticing the past couple of years, I've been silently noticing the slight trend toward aspects of the 2000s and 2010s era sort of coming back, of that Frutiger Aero era coming back, even among the corporate world. One question has been entering my mind over and over again, and that is, should we bring it back? Should we bring back Frutiger Aero? Is it possible to bring back Frutiger Aero? We're going to have to answer a few questions here. The first is, does Frutiger Aero actually look good? What makes the aesthetic so appealing? Is it the actual design of the aesthetic itself, or is there something intangible, something you can't even see, something about the nostalgia factor is what makes Frutiger Aero Frutiger Aero? And what if bringing it back would actually get rid of that and would get rid of a lot of the charm of the aesthetic itself? What if part of its appeal is that it lives in the past, is that it's a glimpse back into history? Personally, I don't know if I want Frutiger Aero as a replica in its full flesh to come back. Now, there are definitely aspects of Frutiger Aero that I would like to see return, and we're going to be talking about that later on in this episode, but I'm not sure if it's really a good idea to bring back the entire aesthetic as it was. Now, I mentioned before that modern corporations are sort of bringing some aspects of Frutiger Aero into their UI design and into their products. And first, I noticed Microsoft doing this. I think this might have even, if it wasn't before my video, then it was at least a little bit afterwards. And I think they sort of caught on early to notice sort of trends in what consumers were craving, and perhaps they thought a more depthful look would hit the spot. And in the early 2020s, what's been really popular in UI design so far until this day has actually been something called neomorphism, which you've heard of skeuomorphism if you've been on my channel a lot or if you're in the UI world. If not, it's basically using real world objects in UI design to make the connection between the digital world and the real world a little bit less distant for the user. It was implemented a lot in the early days of mobile technology and stuff like that. I talk more in depth about it in other videos. I'm sure you could find lots of other good content about it online, but that is skeuomorphism. And neomorphism is a little bit of a modern take on that, in that it uses the same depth and shadow of things kind of looking like it's popping off the page. The difference is that neomorphism is the actual iconography and the symbols and the design of the art pieces. It's simply sort of like the same thing as flat minimalism, except you make it 3D. Like skeuomorphism is the camera is literally looking like a camera. The Notes app has this notebook paper texture to the background. The magnifying glass literally looks like a magnifying glass. I mean, these are all examples of real skeuomorphism. Neomorphism is just flat minimalism, but 3D. In fact, I don't even like the name for it. I don't even like calling it neomorphism. I'm calling it that because colloquially and practically, I mean, that's just what people call it. But if I were to name it, I would probably just call it like 3D flat minimalism. And I guess if you couldn't pick up on it already, I'm not like a super huge fan of it. I think the first couple times I saw the design, I thought it was cool, but then it just started becoming a little bit overused and people were just like recycling these UI templates. It just looks a little bit cheap and a little bit empty. But it's still a very valid and cool design, and there are some implementations of it that I think look really great. So going back to Microsoft, that is what Microsoft uses. They use this fluent design language. There's a lot of textures. There's definitely a lot of dimension and 3D stuff. And if you have watched my other YouTube videos where I sort of go through the eras over time of technology and consumer design language, especially UI design language, then there's the Hollow era and the early versions of iOS era, and then there's the Papercut and the iOS 7 era, and then there's the Practical era, and then there's the whatever. So we kind of like go in chunks, and Microsoft and Apple and Android and iOS all sort of kind of look similar at certain periods of time, like 3 years or so. And so these are classified into eras. So I think that now we are probably in what I would call like the neo-glass or like 3D minimalism era. I mean, just take a look at Microsoft's fluent design, take a look at Apple's liquid glass. Android actually isn't there so much, which is interesting. But Android is often just a tad behind Microsoft and Apple anyway, so that might be normal, and next year they'll catch up a little bit, just like iOS 7 and then Android Lollipop. So that's interesting. But yeah, if you take a look at Microsoft, you take a look at Apple, first of all, the liquid glass on iOS 26 and macOS Tahoe, but also even before that, the thing that iOS 26 was based off in the first place was actually the Vision OS, and that had that sort of neo-glass 3D minimalism look even before iOS 26 did. So it's nice actually to know that companies like Microsoft and Apple, and I'm sure Google is probably right along the way, it's nice that they're experimenting with design like they usually do every couple of years, and I like to see that perhaps they are introducing more depth and more 3D and more texture because of the people's desire for more playful and more human and more interactive UI design. Maybe designers are hearing a little bit of that. Now, of course, am I like 100% a fan of like the way they're doing it? I mean, debatable. I'm not a huge fan of iOS 26, but it is growing on me. And Microsoft Fluent Design is pretty cool. The unfortunate thing about design aesthetics is is actually it's hard to categorize them when you're living through them, and it's hard to really analyze them as much when you're living through them than to look back at them through history. It's a lot easier to categorize them then. Who knows, maybe one day we'll all be nostalgic for flat minimalism, which actually seems to kind of be being phased out for this like neo-glass look. Now, on the topic of Microsoft's Fluent design language or on Apple's liquid glass, is that Frutiger Aero? Is that a type of Frutiger Aero? Is that bringing back Frutiger Aero? And should we completely bring back Frutiger Aero? Should we just like go back to literally how we designed things 20 years ago? Now, first of all, I don't think that iOS 26 is Frutiger Aero, and Microsoft's Fluent is definitely also not Frutiger Aero. And I don't even think it's depth or texture or skeuomorphism that makes Frutiger Aero what it is. And obviously those are big aspects to the technical visual design of it. But I think a lot of what makes it so endearing is actually just the emotional aspect of it, the nostalgia of it. See, what I think a lot of people liked about Frutiger Aero, first of all, okay, maybe it happened during your childhood, maybe it happened during a fond time of your life. But besides that, I think Frutiger Aero, like objectively, I think it implements a lot of amazing UX aspects and digital human connection aspects and how it makes the user feel, like the psychology of it. I think that is what we should perpetuate, the feeling of hope and humanity and just realness and nature and excitement. That, to me, is sort of what Frutiger Aero represents psychologically. And I think maybe some people don't react this way, but I think a lot of people do. And definitely the people who are drawn to the aesthetic, besides the fact that maybe it happened when in their childhood or in a nice time of their life, which could definitely be true. Like I said before, objectively, I think that the psychology and the mindset behind Frutiger Aero, even if some of it is subconscious, is sort of what makes it so appealing. I mean, Frutiger Aero was used at a time when the most amount of people were being transitioned into using mobile technology in their everyday life in the 2000s and the early 2010s. The start of social media, the start of smartphones, the start of just like normalizing technology. And maybe in a creepy sort of way, Frutiger Aero was like the pretend, hopeful, pretend like human type of design style that was implemented to get people to think technology is safe, and then once you're sucked in, now we can get along with the dystopian stuff. And like maybe the intentions behind the aesthetic were like horrible, but honestly I really don't think it was that deep, at least in most of the cases. And that really was used simply to like sell products, because Apple wants to sell an iPhone that's easy for people to use, and implementing a sort of humanistic, naturalistic, skeuomorphic design style, something that makes you feel safe and at home and human, is what is going to be able to get people who have never interacted with technology like this before to ease into it. So all in all, I think this is actually what people are tapping into when they like Frutiger Aero. And of course, the design aspects of it are really nice and pretty as well, but I think they're so nice and pretty, and they can stay in the 2010s, kind of where they belong, because that's where they look like they belong. And nowadays, I don't think we necessarily need to have the same bubbly everything and glossy everything, although sometimes it's fun, and like I definitely do love the actual visual design of Frutiger Aero. But nowadays, I think the main thing is just to replicate the psychology, the emotion, the UX side of things, not as much the more technical UI side of things. I think a lot of Frutiger Aero was the UX, and I think what we should bring back about Frutiger Aero is the UX aspect and the digital human interface interaction and how it did that really well. I think that's what we should bring back, and perhaps more of the design aspect of Frutiger Aero can actually be left in the 2010s. Not all the time, but like in general, like I don't think we need every operating system nowadays to really, look like it came out of 2009, because maybe we want to preserve some of this nostalgia about Frutiger Aero. And another thing I've noticed that is kind of on topic is sort of the decline in UI design nowadays, and just like the thought behind it. I mean, if you research the thought behind the design of like the macOS Aqua design language or the early versions of iOS, you had John Forstall, who was actually a computer science major. He didn't even specialize in design, although he was obviously extremely talented. Now, here's a comment written by user 7hawksand on Reddit, and I'm not reading the whole entire message, but I'm reading just a paragraph of what he said, and I think it's very apropos. On the context of a different user's post on why modern UIs don't look as good as the older versions of iOS, he responds, "It takes people like Jobs and Ives," and by extension, I'm adding from my own opinion, I believe Scott Forstall, and I realized I've been saying his name wrong. It's not John, it's Scott. "They have the influence to make developers build what designers design. The current state of interfaces is a return to the norm of business wanting to save money and engineers not wanting to waste their almighty skills of developing interfaces and would rather spend weeks optimizing some other function that has less effect to the end user." Note, I kind of smoothed over some of his harsher language. These people were all about the thought behind the product, and mass production UI just wasn't such a thing yet. And nowadays you just have these templates going around everywhere. You have this Figma stuff going around everywhere. And obviously we need these people doing UI. We need more easily mass producible things just because there's so many new apps that are being created and so many new platforms that need to be built. So, it makes sense. But I do think it comes kind of with a little bit of a quality drop because it's hard to have all this sorts of intention behind the UI that you're doing now and you just want to push out a quick app. It's harder to have as much intention with the UI that is being made nowadays just because you need to have an app and you need to get it out. And it's easy to just put this sort of basic UI over it and use the template that everybody else is using and use the style that everybody else is using. Maybe you even have AI build it for you. And by the way, here's just another editing note. I realized that I wanted to speak more about this, but I didn't, is the fact that I don't think AI is a good designer, at least yet. And honestly, I think even in the future, I don't think AI will ever be as good of a designer as a human, because what an AI does is it compiles together things that people have already created to form something new. But an AI can never actually invent something of its own. An AI isn't conscious. It doesn't understand emotion. Maybe it can visually, graphically create something and it can get the UI thing down, but the UX, the user experience, the psychology, the intention, the vibe, the intuition, the creativity, and the understanding of how your fellow humans are going to react to this design is something that I'm not sure an AI is ever going to be good at. And yeah, an AI can look at statistics from the past of, humans like this color, or humans like when the buttons are this size, and it can look at data and notice trends and produce UI based off that. But I don't think an AI at this point, I might be totally wrong, can predict things the same way that humans have. Humans have intuition, and we can understand things on a different plane of existence where we can actually start trends or we can notice small niches. We can read between the lines, I think, in ways that AI, at least as of now, isn't as capable of. Now, I'm not super knowledgeable on the topic of AI, honestly. I'm sort of speaking from my own small personal experience with AI and with UI, but obviously I'm not an expert on the matter. If you're interested in the topic, then I guess I would suggest to do some research and I guess tell me what you find. And so this Figma takeover, this template takeover of a little bit of soulless, super round, super bubbly, playful, neo glass, just being pumped out. I do see that maybe it's just a little bit less exciting and intentional than it was before. And maybe instead of just bringing back texture and depth and shadow, bringing back the actual soul of why people possibly resonate with Frutiger Aero, which is the actual human aspect of it, is something that might be really successful among consumers in modern UI. Now I'm just adding this little note that as I was editing the audio, I noticed that I think what I was trying to say is the idea that outsourcing UI to companies or firms or developers that basically make quick and fast UI templates for developers who know how to code but don't necessarily know how to make graphical interfaces. I guess I was trying to say that this doesn't always foster the best GUI or UI outcomes versus if you had the developer who knows and has intention for what the app is about also make the UI, or if you had a really good in-house UI team that also understands the big concept, the big picture, and work together. And I also acknowledge that a lot of people probably also understand that this is the ideal, but they simply can't afford it because, not everyone can be Apple with a huge UI team and a huge design team, and not everyone could be Microsoft and Google. So if you're just like a small indie developer and you're not so into the UI side of things, then it does make sense to outsource it. I was just trying to describe the overall landscape that has been created because of that in the UI and developer world, and what that is kind of looking like nowadays. So all in all, Frutiger Aero isn't really here, and maybe it shouldn't fully be. I believe in creating new designs and aesthetics while also retaining some good aspects of the old. I think it lives on in our memories, and that's part of why it's so great. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed the main part of the show. Now it's time for the comment section, part of the show, where I'll be reading some reviews, opinions, discussions, and comments on my previous podcast, as well as emails, suggestions, and Reddit posts that I receive. There's some pretty cool insights coming up. Now, these comments are all taken from my previous podcast and YouTube video, The Decline of Android UI. Shopper0 says, Material U handles its job 100%. It's simple, it doesn't weigh down the system, it's easy to read and monolithic, which means the colors stay synchronized across the system. It seems to me that Google is trying a bit too hard to make the design not boring, which is why in their demos it looks childish. But in most apps with Material U on my phone, I haven't seen such issues. There, it's fairly restrained. In my opinion, Material U3 is better than Apple's Liquid Glass, because this design is convenient for the user, not just visually interesting. Android has issues, and that many apps don't even offer an option to enable this design, but I'm glad that more and more open source apps are adopting it. It's better to focus on real system problems, for example, more stupid limitations, rather than the design, which someone might simply dislike. Kalban112 from YouTube says, I used to love Nexus devices, but the current Pixel lineup with its pure minimal U, the baby-friendly kind of dumb design, just isn't for me. Nexus UIs were a symbol of freedom and progress. Material U feels like the corporate dullness and generic design. Luca Sell says, I'm sorry, but I love Material U Expressive. I love how uniform it is, it's so fun, and I love how I have a whole color scheme that syncs with a lot of my devices. Yes, Material 3 is mainly Pixel devices, but it's beautiful. Okay, Luca, I guess I disagree with you on this, but it's really nice to hear other opinions and definitely valuable input. Mr. Turtle Sky, how do I like a video multiple times? She just narrated the thoughts I've had for a long time. I'm so glad you feel that way. That's my goal. I've lived through the hollow, papercut, and now the Material U era, and Android did lose its personality and quirk that made me like it in the first place. Great work, Miss Undefined. Thank you. Next we have Patch Akudi 7338. Now, there was actually more to this comment, but I sort of just took one of the paragraphs that I thought was the most relevant. He says, what it boils down to is the whole UI is less space effective to the point where it feels childish. Why do buttons take up 25% of the screen? iOS used to feel like the dumbed down operating system, but now it's far more space efficient than Android is, and that's really sad. I just want Material design back, honestly. I didn't know what I had until it was gone. OP Letter says, to me, Material is just straight up ugly. The super roundedness, the color palettes, the large font sizes and padding, the playfulness, it all just looks bad. But this doesn't mean I want sharp edges and dullness. I just want the subtlety and content density from Lollipop. And I especially don't want all my apps to look the same, both while using the app and on the home screen. I don't want all my icons to be the same shape. Inventor Zahran says, the skeuomorphic era iOS looked like it was trying too hard to pretend it wasn't a digital interface on a flat screen, while the early years of Android were much more unabashedly high-tech. Apple wanted you to forget you were using a touchscreen, while Android wanted you to remember that you were interacting with a marvelously modern piece of technology. Legio XXI on YouTube says, one take on this video I have to disagree with is that the Android user base is more techie. That seems like a US perspective, where iOS is dominating and Android is an underdog, and Android customers usually intentionally go against the norm. But globally, Android dominates almost every market. The main reason for that isn't the GUI, or even more freedom, but simply the lower price of Android phones. Without the whole status symbol thing and the iMessage dependency that only exists in the US, Android is just a more practical option for most people. The GUI isn't that important for the average customer, and I think with all of that you also have the explanation why the Android UI lost its techie edginess in favor of a more streamlined and boring UI. Android is the mainstream mobile operating system, not iOS. Now here's an insight from user Eternal Front from Reddit. The original material design was the best. Buttons placed in reachable areas, a great sense of depth and layers, and unmatched fluidity and motion. I feel like Google from 2013 to 2019 was at its best. I really hope you guys enjoyed those audience insights. I really enjoy reading the comments. By the way, I read every single one. I manually curate them and put some of them in podcasts like I just did. Then go ahead and write a comment because I will see it. Now I'm going to be reading some 5-star reviews, just so you know they're not officially 5-star reviews, because I receive these on YouTube where technically it's not actually possible to rate a podcast in the traditional way. But these are some super nice comments and I just wanted to give them a quick shout out. We have RVRPB on YouTube. He says, honestly, I only watch your videos because of the way you narrate. I don't agree with you fully on every single thing, even with your older videos, but the way you narrate is just so sincere. It's human, it's real. It feels like listening to a friend passionately talk and or rant. And in the sea of overproduced, pretentious, obviously ad-driven content on YouTube nowadays, your essays are just refreshing. Wow, I really appreciate it. That really means a lot to me, and that's what this whole channel is about. One more super nice review is from Robotomo4249 on YouTube. It's great to see another undefined video. I don't know how you do it, but every video is very comforting to watch. While watching, I often feel like a young kid again that was drawn to and put in awe by Windows Aero and other big design changes and technology in general of the time. Thank you very much. And of course, because he said something so nice, I'm going to read his thought as well. He says, Android design for the beginning up until around 2017 was wonderful. The early days of Android looked very fun and futuristic, although it could be a bit unpolished at times. I think that early HTC Sense was one of the best phone UIs we've ever had. The perfect blend of usability, skeuomorphism, professionalism, and fun. The paper-cut design, in my opinion, is light, fun, and has this summery look to it, which brings me back to 2016 when 12-year-old me's dream phone was the first Google Pixel. Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel that vibe too. And he continues, I also very much dislike Material UI. I liken it to corporate Memphis. It also screams, we aren't just a business, we're family, in my opinion, like a false sense of comfort and oversimplicity. Thank you so much for the review, the feedback, and of course all of the amazing and interesting insights that you guys have been sharing. If you want to be featured on a future episode, then just leave comments on YouTube and Reddit everywhere. I have a Discord server now, so I guess that's fair game as well. If you want to more officially send me something or you have inquiries for any reason, you can contact me at undefined_100@outlook.com. That's undefined_100@outlook.com. Thank you very much for listening. If you write a 5-star review on whichever platform you're listening on, I guarantee to read it out loud on the next show. And of course, my YouTube and other social media accounts are always linked down below if you're interested in additional content or just want to reach out. Thanks for listening.